All right, well, happy Co-op Month, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on land, legacy, and community. My name is Charlie Michael, and I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator at National Farmers Union. Joined here today in the virtual DC office by Emma Lindberg, who's NFU's Senior Director of Education and Programming. We'll be on throughout the webinar today to offer technical and moral support. We know you guys have lots of choices in Co-op Month programming. We appreciate you being here for our session today. Thank you for joining us. We hope this presentation will bring you insight and inspiration in all your cooperative endeavors. If you haven't already, this webinar is the first in a three-part series, and we'd love for you to register for the next two. There'll be links in the chat in just a minute here. Coming up, we have Building a Regional Food System next week and Making Cooperatives Work in 2 weeks. 2 more great sessions, and we look forward to having all of you tune in for those as well. We know you may not be able to tune in live, so we will be sending out a recording and transcript after each session. Please feel free to use the chat to connect with us and each other during the presentation today. We'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Please drop a message in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from. Maybe give a shout out to your favorite co-op while you're there. As usual, we've set aside time for questions following the presentation today. So if one comes to mind, just post it in the Q&A, which you can access by clicking the icon at the bottom of your screen. We're also offering closed captioning today. There's an icon that says live transcript, which you can click to activate on-screen captions. Or if you'd like to view transcript in a separate window, there's a stream text link in the chat, which you can paste into your web browser's address bar. We are recording this presentation. As I mentioned, you'll receive a recording link and transcript in a follow-up email. You can also watch all of our past webinars on the NFU YouTube channel. Lastly, at the end, we'll be posting a link to an evaluation where you can share your thoughts on today's presentation and note any questions that we didn't get to today. We'll do our best to follow up on any questions that we can't cover with our presenters during this session. We're interested in learning more about your involvement in cooperatives. I've put together a very short survey, which is intended to improve our programs and elevate your stories. You don't need to be a Farmers Union member to take the survey, but there's an optional field to let us know if you are. There's also an option to include your name, which will enter you to win an REI gift card. We're raffling off 2 winners two gift cards per month now through the end of the year. Survey link is also in the chat. If you aren't familiar with Farmers Union, we're a grassroots producer-driven organization, and our mission is to advocate for family farmers, ranchers, and rural communities through education, legislation, and cooperation. We empower our members to provide leadership in cooperative enterprises and education, and we promote cross-sector collaboration with consumer and worker cooperatives and credit unions. This webinar is part of those efforts. Farmers Union was formed in 1902 with the express purpose of promoting cooperative development. Within a year, the first Farmers Union marketing cooperatives were up and running, including cotton gins, flour mills, and warehouse operations from Texas to Georgia. In 1913, Farmers Union members in Kansas created the Farmers Union Cooperative Association, an ambitious multi-stakeholder cooperative, and pioneered the farm supply co-op model by forming the Farmers Union Jobbing Association in 1914. In 1929, Farmers Union leaders in Oklahoma took an important step to apply the cooperative model beyond agriculture by helping to organize the first cooperative health service in the US. And later in the 1970s, Farmers Union would carry on this legacy by promoting rural health cooperatives using an early form of health maintenance organizations. In 1931, Farmers Union leaders came together to form Farmers Union Central Exchange, a predecessor to CHS, which has since grown to be the largest cooperative in the country. And underpinning all of this was a remarkable record of advocacy campaigns, including most notably Farmers Union's persuasion of Senator Arthur Capper and Representative Andrew Volstead in 1922 to introduce legislation permitting farmers to act together cooperatively to handle, process, and market their products. Congress passed the measure, the Capper-Volstead Act, which remains a foundational piece of enabling legislation for farmer cooperatives today. Farmers Union mounted a vigorous defense in the face of later attempts to weaken cooperative institutions, including its 1979 Save Our Co-op campaign and resistance to banking deregulation in the 1980s to preserve the farm credit system. Today, our members remain fierce advocates committed to protecting the democratic nature of cooperatives and their unique structure as member-owned and controlled enterprises. You can visit our website, nfu.org, to learn more about what we do and how you can get involved. And with that, I'll turn it over to Billy Mitchell, who's National Farmers Union's Food Safety Modernization Act Training Coordinator, to introduce our presenters.
Thanks, Charlie. I'm so excited to be here with everyone today and to be a part of this conversation. Russell and Judith are joining us from Love is Love Farm, and I've had just the honor and the joy of knowing them and being friends for years. Russell and I have shared popsicles and talked about pathogenic E. coli together. Judith and I have talked biodynamics with teenagers, and later that night, they all looked up at the moon and they asked me, was Miss Judith right? Does the moon really control nature? And I was like, I don't know, maybe. And they were freaked out. And then the next week we dug potatoes. And then I just got to meet Calvin for the first time this afternoon, but we were connected to Calvin through some good friends over at the Wallace Center. And all the folks on this call have years of experience in agriculture, working together. And then Calvin, years and years of cooperative experience. And Judith and Russell are on a new adventure with a cooperative. So with that, Calvin, we'll let you take it away for the first part of our presentation, and we'll pass the mic over to Russell and Judith. And Calvin, you might still be on mute.
Okay, well, thank you, Billy. Just want to say good afternoon, everyone. And this is say I am Calvin Head, and I'm director of Mileston Cooperative Association. We're located in rural Holmes County, Mississippi. Holmes County is in the Mississippi Delta, and it's an area that's devastated by poverty, and COVID has impacted that so much more that it's kind of really, really difficult to sustain a good livelihood here, and there lacks a whole lot of opportunity. So I'm part of a cooperative that was organized in 1942, and in the early 20s, it kind of diminished because a lot of the older members were deceased, and then it was inherited by third generation farmers. And I was brought on as AmeriCorps Vista after moving back from the Midwest to reorganize the cooperative. And when I got involved, I found there were a lot of independent farmers that wasn't working together as a cooperative, which was part of their makeup and part of their charter or their structure. So the co-op exists now, third generation farmers, predominantly African American. These are limited resource farmers, but there's about 2,500 acres collectively affiliated with the cooperative. Some large farm is 1,000 acres and some small is 2 acres. So it was a predominantly agricultural cooperative, as I mentioned, by design, but we kind of stressed our tentacles a little bit because, as I mentioned, there's a lot of poverty and there are a lot of issues here. So we got more involved in economic and community development, which led us into a massive youth environment because we were trying to get traditional farmers who were struggling to diversify and get involved with specialty crops. And that was a lot more labor intense because they were used to the big equipment and machinery doing all of the work, but growing produce is more hands-on and it required a labor force. And we utilized youth in the community to be that labor force. And so to this day, and even as we speak, we got about 15 young people who are working in fields. We're harvesting greens right now. And they also led the USDA harmonized GAP certification process for 2 years, successfully passing the audit to get certification so that we can open new markets for the products that we grow. In addition, we're into housing, try to assist low-income families and refurbish housing. We also have a partnership with the Mississippi Council on Development of Disabilities. We help individuals who are individuals with disability to find themselves and be more accepted and be more part of the process. We also had a facility, our school closed down in the community, and the co-op inherited a 22,000 square feet facility that used to be a school, but we converted it into a community center. But it came equipped with fiber optic. And being in a rural area, we weren't able to get a lot of internet connections. So we were kind of like third world conditions, but having access to that fiber optic, we kind of boosted the signal, and a lot of people in the community can benefit to an extent to get internet services. So as I mentioned, we're predominantly agricultural cooperative. And 2 years after the pandemic, 2 consecutive years, our crops got flooded out, and we lost a lot. But we partnered with an organization, Communities Unlimited, who kind of bailed us out late last summer, and we were able to grow some quick crops that we were able to take to Memphis and kind of recoup some of the loss. But nevertheless, we lost a lot, and some farmers lost their enthusiasm because farming is a risk. And we tried to make it more of a passion for farmers than, trying to be burdened by all of the stuff associated with it. So now we've developed a 7,500 square feet hydroponic system that's more of a controlled environment that we can grow some products for high-end restaurants, which would not alternatively impact our traditional farming, but if something happens like a disaster or something, maybe we'll have crops that'll still be developed. So that's kind of where we are and who we are. We're making a difference in my mind in terms of impacting our community and making lives better for those less fortunate. We strategically target people who are considered just lay persons who stand idle on the corner all day and don't have any hope or any interest in they just lost their self-esteem, and they just feel like life is passing them by. So we try to take those individuals, and you would be surprised at the kind of talent some of those people have that, they might not have credentials, but they got talents and they got passion and they got stuff that they like to do. We try to match them with their passion in terms of the work that they do. And it's working very well. And at the same time, we go back and get them, a lot of them don't have IDs, social security card, birth certificates, and we try to get all of that stuff for them and take them through an apprenticeship process to help them become better citizens and be self-sufficient. Because in Holmes County, there's a lot of opportunity, but there are a lot of able-bodied people. Holmes County is predominantly young, or geographically, it's a lot of young people. Strategically placed outside of the county. It's more young people than elderly people is what I'm trying to say. So we're trying to create opportunity for people to work and become self-sufficient. And that's the mission of the co-op now. We still agricultural, but we do a lot of economic and community development as well.
Calvin, whoa, thank you. That was like just inspiring and hard to hear and motivating. I mean, especially just what you said around, farming is a risk, but the work that y'all are doing with the community to build networks and build resilience, and that part about matching people with their passions and then being able to provide the tools to be successful. I guess I'll just echo what you said, creating that opportunity in my mind, and I think our audience would agree, is definitely making a huge difference. So thank you for that overview, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A, but first we'll pass it over to Russell and Judith.
Sure.
Hi, I'm gonna go first and talk a little bit about the history of Love is Love and where we've come from, and then Russell can talk a little bit about our partnership and the future and where we think we're going. And I just want to say, Calvin, that first of all, Calvin was my father's name, and so I'm always happy to meet a Calvin. And second of all, I feel like you have so many things that you can teach us and questions that you may be able to help us sort through as we're standing up this co-op. It's an honor to be here. with you. So thank you for sharing your time and your expertise. So my husband, Joe Reynolds, and I have been farming as landless farmers for the last 13 years. We have leased land primarily in one place, but we started in a farm a little bit east of the city of Atlanta. We leased about 5 acres from an older farming couple that owned their land that couldn't continue their operation, and we stood up our farm business, Love is Love Farm, there inside of infrastructure that they had already built and allowed us to lease. And then about 2 years after that, we moved into a really interesting opportunity inside the city of Atlanta in a co-housing community called the East Lake Co-Housing Community. This neighborhood essentially had collectivized their backyards to become a working farm and leased it as an opportunity to new and beginning farmers. And we took the helm there about 11 years ago and started to build a farm business. It was a tremendously wonderful opportunity. Both of them were tremendously wonderful opportunities, and we learned so much along the way about how to operate a farm business and how to farm. Neither one of us had really come from traditional farming backgrounds. We were liberal arts kids who decided that we wanted to do something meaningful with our lives and our hands and our labor. So we got into farming, and there were tons and tons and tons of things to learn. And we set about doing that for the last 13 years. And I think one of the biggest lessons that we learned along the way is that farming for us was way better as a team sport. We really enjoyed the collaboration of working with other people. We enjoyed, of course, having the extra hands and having the extra backs, but also the extra brains and the extra creativity and the extra stamina when things were hard. So as we went further and further into our farming careers, we started to ask about what would the future be. And of course, I think anyone who farms understands that for us, it wasn't so much about the ownership and wanting to own a piece of land, but it was about the permanency. And when you're working in a piece of land and you're investing your time and your labor and your energy and you're building relationship, truly building relationship with a piece of land, you kind of want it to be long-term. You want a long-term commitment. So we thought a lot about wanting to have a place that could be ours, for the rest of our career without question. And that led to questions of land ownership. And it's challenging. It's challenging. I think farming is challenging, period, stop. But farming in a urban or peri-urban area where there are development pressures around land, it's really hard to make the numbers work, to understand how you could actually acquire a farm. So we started thinking about it and trying to figure out how we could potentially own a farm. And we entered into some conversations with organizations that were interested in helping farmers acquire land. And right around the same time that we started to have those conversations and think about how we could acquire our own farm, we really started thinking about what we would want that farm to look like, and what we would want the day-to-day and the work to be like, and who else we would want around the table. And very quickly we decided that it was something that we wanted to do in collaboration with other growers who shared our values and who were interested in building the same kinds of institutions is the word that comes to mind, though it's a lofty word, but having a long-term view for how a farm could be a piece of a community. And so we just were lucky enough to meet some other amazing growers who also were interested in land acquisition. And we started to have conversations with them about, what would it look like if we did this in collaboration, if we did this together. There was a young man who worked with us, has worked with us for the last 6 years, who studied ag at a technical school and who had decided he wanted his career to be in farming, Demetrius Milling. And he was interested in going on and building whatever was going to be next. And then we knew Monica Ponce and her husband, Russell Honderd, through mutual friends and just the farming community in Atlanta. So we started to have conversations with them about, whether or not this is something that we could do in partnership. And we looked around, and I think most farmers are under-resourced. They classify as under-resourced people, and we looked to innovative models to help under-resourced people, and it took us really quickly to examples through our friends at the Federation and the West Georgia Growers Cooperative, and we started to, as we thought about this model and how we might build a new kind of a farm, I think it was Russell and Monica who quickly brought us to, well, what if we did a cooperative, and what if specifically it was a worker-owned cooperative? And that has led us through a world, and we decided to do that. I should say that. We decided to make our farm a worker-owned cooperative. So the Love is Love LLC is being absorbed basically by Love is Love Cooperative Farm. And we're in the process of acquiring about 70 acres a little bit east of Atlanta, and learning a plethora of lessons about what it means to work in cooperation, truly work in cooperation, and make decisions in cooperation and collaboration, and build the structures to think about how other people might also join us and be a part of this worker-owned cooperative. And I don't want to take too much away from the future, so I'll let Russell talk a little bit more about, I told you how we landed where we landed, and then Russell can tell you how we're going to go where we're going to go.
Sweet. Thank you, Judith, for that. So my name is Russell Honderd. I'm another worker owner at Love is Love Cooperative Farm, which we started this year. This is we didn't start it this year, but this is our first year on land as a cooperative. I'm going to talk a little bit, or kind of talk about both the practical reasons that we think the worker-owned cooperative is the right way to go, as well as what I see as more the moral reasons to go with a worker-owned cooperative. And also just my experiences that led me to that place. And so I think early on in my farming career, one of the reasons I wanted to become a farmer was to own my own farm, or own a farm with a partner. I wanted to be in charge and make the decisions. I thought that I would always make the right decisions. And I just really wanted that kind of control over my work life. So as I got into farming, I realized pretty quickly a few things. Farmers don't have enough money to pay their employees enough, oftentimes, for those employees to go on and buy their own farm and start their own farm. So really quickly, I realized I was kind of in this paradox where, in order to learn what I wanted to do, I was going to be working on farms for 10 years just to get to a position where I could understand what was actually happening outside of the fields, which is, half of, or, the difference between a successful farm and a not successful farm is what goes on, like what happens after you harvest the produce. And so I realized pretty quickly that I wanted to, that I went back to school to learn specifically about farming and running a farm. And after that, I started managing farms. I was being hired by folks who had a lot of money, whether it was a business or an individual, and they were hiring me to come on and start or manage their farming operation. And in those experiences, I got a lot of experience managing the farm and really learned kind of the backside of the farm, the back end. And but I still wasn't being compensated in a way that I could save money for a down payment on land, much less the amount of money it would take to finance the equipment and float myself or my family for 6 months before I started harvesting any crops. And so, being under-resourced, under-leveraged, being in a field that doesn't adequately pay the farmers or the farm workers, it really, it became clear that I was either going to have to find some rich folks with good hearts to finance me, or pool resources. And so partnering with Joe and Judith and Demetrius and Love is Love was really a no-brainer. They brought an incredible resource in terms of a recognized brand and a market that was immediate. And then again, like the pooling of our capital resources, whether that be cash on hand or a network of investors, like we wouldn't have been able to get started without those resources that we all kind of brought to the partnership. So those are some really practical reasons for starting a cooperative. Additionally, in terms of the other kind of the practical, so that's kind of the practical reason for starting a worker cooperative or starting with this model. And then in terms of kind of the continuation and longevity, again, going back to my personal experience working on farms as a farm hand, you're expected to do a lot of work. And the only people who are going to stick with that are people who want to be farmers themselves, and have another reason for being on that farm than making money. And I don't want to be the manager that's responsible for chasing those people away from farming. I want them to have a good experience, and I want them to be compensated in a way that I didn't experience and allows them to move on and start the farms that we need in our communities. I want them to feel valued. And there's a lot of ways to make people feel valued, but if someone is struggling to pay their car insurance and pay their rent and pay all their other bills, it's hard to really feel valued in that position that you're working. So thinking about that in terms of how do we retain people, even in the startup years, or even though farming, no matter where you are, is going to be hard and the profit margins are going to be slim, like how do you incentivize people to stay with you? And so trying to figure out how to fairly compensate people is one of those big challenges that we have. Another challenge that we have, looking into the future, well, I'm sorry, let me back up. Let me address that one real quick. So by being a worker-owned cooperative, we are essentially acknowledging that workers generate the value that a farm produces, that everyone participates equally, and that a farm couldn't run without someone packing boxes, someone cutting weeds, someone writing invoices, and someone standing at a farmer's market booth. And without any one of those people, the system falls apart. Everyone is responsible for the success of the farm. And so everyone should be compensated that way. And so compensation or part of folks' compensation is based on hours spent working. And that is, that determines a portion of the profits that they are entitled to. As worker owners, we divide that up how we want. With employees, folks who aren't worker owners, but are hired and paid by us, that portion of their labor, we can't put in our pockets. It's either going back to the business or back to the employees. So it gives us that opportunity and that ability to say to our employees, hey, look, this is why we care about speed. This is why we care about efficiency. This is why we do these things these ways. And if, the more we can accomplish those goals, or any ideas you bring to us about efficiency, we all benefit from. It's all money going back into our pockets. So that's one way. And if there isn't any profits, everyone understands that no one's, making any money. So you don't have employees, kicking stones being like, oh, well, we're doing all this hard work and we aren't getting paid and, they're getting rich. Even if that's never the case.
Russell.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop you there so we can get to Q&A.
Okay.
But thank you. And for anybody Russell and I are friends, so I promise if anyone just had a heart attack watching me interrupt him, I think hopefully we'll be okay.
Can I say really quick, that was just one of the benefits, and there's I could go on for an hour. So
I know.
You gotta trust me on
I
that.
appreciate everything that y'all said. I mean, there's some good overlaps, with Calvin, especially around crossing generations, working with youth, Love is Love, getting started on land that older farmers made available. And I mean, Russell, everything that you shared around, it's hard work, but it's meaningful work, and finding your passion and that collaboration across community. And Judith, that idea of building relationships, not just with people, but with the land itself. So Calvin, I want to give you the opportunity to either ask them a question, or if you want, Judith had said that they are learning a plethora of lessons. So if you also just have a lesson you'd like to offer them, that'd be great. And for y'all tuning in, please put your questions in the Q&A or the chat box.
Sure. This is the second time I've heard of workers own cooperative. It's a little bit different from the way we operate, but I want to ask my question from a structural or managerial perspective. Are the workers part of the decision-making process, or are they just part of the revenue stream? And then just to say, as I guess a piece of advice and what my experience has taught me, in any type of cooperative, I'm sure there are some similar struggles, but all parties don't play fair. Everybody don't keep their commitment, and they don't hold up to their end of the bargain. And sometimes we have to make tough decisions to pass people by, not harshly, but just based on your level of participation is how, because the way we're set up, the cooperative itself handles all the infrastructure. And then when farmers make crops as a result of benefiting from that infrastructure, then they invest back in the cooperative. So if somebody doesn't make their investment back or keep their commitment, then we can't allow them to continue and be serviced like the other members.
So the first part of your question, we can't totally answer because we are not at a point where we've hired additional employees. We're still just the 5 worker owners are the only current employees. And we do foresee, for us, employees will be able to participate in the process of decision making, and we will practice an open book policy with them, so they'll be informed of how the farm is operating. But worker owners are the only ones who will actually have the actual final decision making powers in business and managerial decision. And then employees can apply to become a worker owner after the equivalent of 2 years working with the farm. And then that application process will be a year-long process in which they kind of follow or shadow us as we are engaging in the more business and administrative end of things. And then there's also $1,000 member share that they have to purchase, which we set that price as one that we figured we can pay people enough that that would be affordable, but it's still enough that folks, have to be committed to, put that $1,000 up.
They also have to be committed just to come to all the meetings that we have to make all of the decisions that we have to make. I feel like that's a big demonstration of commitment. And I wanted to answer a little bit. I think you referenced, Calvin, this idea that, not everybody plays fair, and sometimes you have to make difficult decisions. I think we're so new and we're so at the beginning of this that we haven't been faced with that in the same way. We've been through some difficult times together. The first piece of land that we thought we were going to buy, we got really close to closing on, and then we didn't. So we had to start over, and that was certainly a challenge. But we haven't had, we haven't had to make difficult decisions within the membership about members, but we did spend a pretty good amount of time thinking about how we would deal with it and what the process would be in our bylaws, and have, we'll see how it works in practice if we ever have to put it in practice. But, we spend some time thinking about, like, what if someone isn't a good fit after they come in? How are we going to handle it? What are we going to do? What's the process for voting? And do they get their $1,000 buy-in back, or do they not? The answer is they do. And all of that, I think this isn't exactly what you asked, but I think for me, one of the big takeaways of going through this process is there's so much structure to put in place, and there's so much thought that has to happen on the front side to make it work, or even to take a shot at making it work. And I have to give a big shout out to the Georgia Cooperative Development Center, who we reached out to pretty early on, and who has been really helpful to us in thinking about all of these kinds of questions, and the legal questions and the tax questions and all of those kinds of things that you have to think about when you're becoming a legal entity that's not as traditionally recognized as other legal entities.
Thanks, Judith and Russell. I've got a bunch of questions, but I did want to give you all a chance if you wanted to pose a question to Calvin before I asked anything, or we dove. We do have some questions coming in from the audience as well.
Russell, I feel like you had a great question. We talked last night, not to put you on the spot, but.
Well, my question for Calvin was the same as his for us. Which is, essentially, which is like, how is a cooperative, is there a way that you have seen, or how has the cooperative come together due to either an external threat or kind of an internal issues, struggles? Like how have those issues impacted your cooperative, and kind of how did they address those challenges as they arose?
Well, I think the tie that kind of binded us and made us more committed, I would say, for lack of a better word, is the fact that we found that there was strength in collaboration. The independence piece didn't work because we didn't leave everybody out to dry. And the labor pool, we pooled the labor, we pooled the equipment, we pooled the resources. And that part about, you're gonna benefit from whatever infrastructure it is if you keep your end of the bargain. And if, something happened beyond their control and they couldn't keep their end, then, there was some leniency. But people who would just get their money and neglect the process, then obviously we couldn't just continue to allow them to be predators. So after the first year, that only happened a couple times, and then I guess the next year they thought about, well, I'm going to get left out. So that worked out well. That worked out when we shared everything, and everybody knew that they had a support group of workers, equipment, resources. That made a difference.
Thank you, Calvin. And Calvin, I have a question for you, and then Charlie, I'll pass the mic over to you for the audience questions. But Calvin, what brought me to Georgia was actually an AmeriCorps position. And people always ask me, why did you stay in Georgia? And a big part of that is Judith and her farm and life partner, Joe, and the community that they introduced me to, eventually getting to meet Russell and Monica and a bunch of other amazing people. So AmeriCorps brought you to Holmes County. What made you decide to stay and stay engaged in that area?
Well, actually, I was born here, and I moved to the Midwest, and I didn't like the city. And then when I got here, the first task when I moved back was that I saw a position with the Mississippi Association of Cooperatives actually asked me to serve as an AmeriCorps visitor through their initiative. And my first task was to reorganize the cooperative. And so I live here, I'm stuck here. Well, I take that back, I'm not stuck here. I enjoy being here. I mean, a lot of people come to Mileston and they say, you gotta be nuts to live here. But I love the environment, I love nature, I don't like the hustle and bustle of the city. So it was a perfect fit for me to come back home. And then understand I had to live here. I didn't want my family to grow up and my friends and those associated with us to grow up like we did, you know, with nothing basically. And then I saw the opportunities inside of this community that we can do better. You know, I just think people need an opportunity. And that's my passion, and that's what got me still here.
Thank you. Yeah, that ability that y'all have to provide opportunities and these opportunities for collaboration, it's really inspiring. So with that, Charlie, I'm happy to pass the mic over to you if you wanted to address a couple of the audience questions and share them as well.
Yeah, thanks, Billy, and thanks to our presenters too. I mean, just incredible stories. I really appreciate all these. We have a very interesting question from Annie, who's out in Oregon. They're having an extended drought out there. A lot of people she knows are selling off their farms. And she's wondering, this is maybe more of a Russell Judith question, but I'm sure Calvin, you'll have some great input here as well. She's asking if you guys could give a broad overview, maybe it's 5 steps, maybe it's a little bit more, a little bit less, I don't know, of how to transition to a worker-owned farm. She feels like if some of these folks selling off their farms, if she could give them a quick pitch on how to do that, that they might be able to leave feeling like they completed the circle instead of having to sell off to a developer.
I'm happy to take a stab at it if y'all want me to. I'm sure I won't cover everything. And, you know, in regards to the specific question, the biggest challenge I can see is time. It takes a lot of time to identify the group of worker. I mean, in the case of an operational farm, then perhaps your workers at that farm might want to come together, but it still takes time to build the structure, to coalesce the group, to identify, to make decisions about how the existing farm is going to realize the value that they've built in a business and how they're going to realize the value of the land. And I would say, you know, for someone who feels like they need to get out of farming, that can sometimes be an urgent feeling. So, you know, if anyone's thinking about it or thinking about how to help farmers, I would say, like, encourage farmers to begin the conversation as early as possible to think about it. And one of the things that for me along the way was a kind of a realization. It wasn't something that we set out to do, but because of the way that we've structured this worker-owned cooperative, and because we're lucky enough to be working with this national nonprofit to acquire farmland that will be permanently conserved, it's come to be apparent to me that what we're actually doing is sort of standing up a new kind of a family farm. So we have this entity that exists and owns a piece of land that can be worked in perpetuity. And we've created the structure where new growers can come in as they're interested and take over some of the responsibilities as other growers move on or lose interest or whatever is going to happen. And I think that's interesting to think about when you think about the challenges of family farms and the fact that a lot of times that second or third generation doesn't want to stay on the farm. And there are other people outside of the family who may be interested in the work, who may be called to do the work, but how do you create equity for them? And that's a part of the question that I think we're trying to answer. So, I mean, in terms of 5 easy steps or even 3 or 10 easy steps, I don't know.
Maybe five difficult steps.
I would say that step number 1 is try to give yourself as much time as possible to do this thing. Step number 2 is really ask some questions about what is the value that the existing farm who's trying to get out needs to have realized. Like, what they've built, what is that worth? Where are they willing to compromise in terms of, especially land value? I mean, I imagine in Oregon, the land prices are astronomical. Find the resources to help you build the structure as quickly as possible. For us, it was the Georgia Cooperative Development Center and friends from West Georgia Cooperative and other cooperatives. But, you know, there are lots of national organizations that exist to help, including the Farmers Union, who can help point you in the right direction to giving you templates and questions to ask. And back to the time question, I mean, for me, that's also been a big takeaway, is like, it just takes a tremendous amount of time to coalesce a group of people around decision making. It's a different kind of decision making than what many people are used to.
Yeah, I would also, I mean, second everything that Judith said. We're doing stuff a little bit different, and that we're creating a new entity, but the new entity purchased the old entity. And I know the National Young Farmers Coalition has a lot of resources on transitioning farms from one owner to the next. So they'd be a great resource to look at. And then, like Judith said, there's a lot of nonprofits specifically focused on educating and helping folks transition from a family-owned business or a sole proprietorship to a worker-owned cooperative. So Judith mentioned some of those. I can't remember the acronyms off the top of my head, but they're fairly easy to find online. And like time, it takes time. I would say the 2 steps would be the employees need to get together and decide that they want to keep farming together and farm that land together, and then they can form a business entity. And then the second step would be for the current owner to sell the farm and business to that new entity. How they work out the valuation of those things, how they work out the financing. Owner financing is obviously the easiest for something like that, because banks don't want to mess with you if you're a farmer unless you have land they can take later or some tractors they can take. So those would be, the employees need to want it, and then the owners need to want it enough to probably owner finance are the 2 big things.
I'm curious, Calvin, if you have anything to add on kind of the land retention side and the legacy of land.
Yeah, I go back to one of the things that we all been saying: commitment. I mean, you got to find those partners and stakeholders that are committed, because farming is not the prettiest thing all the time, and it's hard work, extremely hard work. If you don't find committed people, it's not gonna work. You got to find people with common bond. It's okay to have a lot of diversity, but there got to be enough commonality to make it work. And if you got one side pulling one way and the other another way, it's going to be a tough road to hoe, as we say in Mississippi.
I see someone dropped a link to Cooperation Works in the chat, which is a great nationwide network of cooperative developers. We're actually going to be delving into the weeds of the cooperative development process in a couple weeks with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union Cooperative Development Center. And we'll have a bit more on how that process works, how you can identify a developer that's appropriate for what you're looking to do. And then I'll share out more information in the follow-up email to this webinar and after that one about where to look to kind of get started with some of this kind of guidance. I think we are going to have to wrap there, though, for today. I have a few quick wrap-up slides. Thank you again to our presenters. This has been really great. I'm going to attempt to do a quick screen share here. Cool. Okay. So as always, we value your feedback. There's a survey link in the chat. This is your chance to share feedback on the session. Note any questions that we didn't get to today. Suggest ideas for future programming, including, very importantly, how we can make it more accessible and inclusive. And of course, if you want to share some kind words for the presenters, we always love passing that along too. Applications are open for the Beginning Farmer Institute. This is a free year-long training program that NFU offers designed to improve the health of your farm or ranch business. Applications are going to be open through December 1st this year, and the program will kick off in January of next year. The purpose of this program is really to bring a diverse group of people together around a shared set of learning objectives. We focus on things like business formation and planning, land access, accounting, and taxes. And the program's open to ages 18 and up. It's inclusive of all operation types, scales of production. So if you're interested in applying or you know someone who might be, link in the chat, you can visit. It's nfu.org/beginning-farmer-institute. Hopefully an easy URL. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have spoken that one, but check it out. It's really a fantastic program that me and Emma here in our office work really closely together to make happen. Next week, we'll be having our next webinar on a Wednesday. So we're going from a Thursday this week to a Wednesday next week. The Northwest Food Hub Network is going to be joining us. This is a joint effort of the Puget Sound Food Hub Co-op, Link Foods, Western Montana Growers Co-op, and Mission West Community Development Partners. They're working very effectively to build a regional food system that brings together a really diverse range of producers, commodity operations, dairy farmers, produce growers. It's a really interesting project. There's a little bit of Farmers Union connection. We have a Montana board member who's been really hands-on in the project, so we'd encourage you guys to tune in for this. A big focus will be how they're applying Principle 6, cooperation among cooperatives, to combat corporate consolidation, support resilient farms and food hubs. Registration link in the chat. Please join us. If you want to follow us on social media, there's all of our handles. Go to nfu.org/connect to subscribe to our newsletter, although I know you guys get plenty of emails related to the co-op programming already. And I think that's about all I have. Thank you again to our presenters. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Drive safely, and we'll see you next week.